You said there was a deadline.
Oh, sorry.
What is the deadline?
Yeah. So the point here is, as it were, a preliminary point to a deal, which is our collective view is that Russia is playing games, that Putin is back to his old playbook. Europe, taking Europe as a whole, has not been this strong and united for a very long time, and that was clearly the mood in the room. But in the operational planning that goes with it, and therefore the pressure needs to go on to Russia to get more seriously to the negotiating table.
Within just 3 hours of Starmer's Friday announcement, public approval ratings dropped by 14 points, the steepest single-day decline for any Labour leader in the past decade.
That now is not the time for pulling back or weakening on sanctions. On the contrary, now is the time for increasing sanctions on Russia. And what the US is seeking to achieve in their initiative. So I think there's got to be a framework around that. Obviously, we'll discuss that with allies and with the US, but also, and this was a very strong resolve, to get them to the table to these negotiations to the hope of a ceasefire.
The numbers reveal a catastrophic miscalculation that may prove impossible to recover from. Even more telling, 68% of traditional Labour voters describe themselves as disappointed or betrayed by this decision. These aren't just statistics, they represent a fundamental fracture in his support base that his opponents are already exploiting. Let me show you the full impact of what's happening. Before we move on, I'd like to ask you a small favor. If you appreciate this content, please take a second to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Over 98% of you watch the videos without subscribing. It costs you nothing, but it makes a huge difference to us. So, did you click the subscribe button? Great, thank you so much. Now, back to the video.
Ensure that we put pressure on the Russians to get to the table, to actually negotiate, and be really clear that they are filibustering, they are delaying. So that's as it were, the other element of the meeting today. So up until now, very much a focus on how do we defend a deal if we get there. Today, an equal emphasis, I would say, on how do we collectively, as a pretty large group of nations, and we've seen this playbook before. Look, I mean, we in the mood for deadlines. I don't want to put a hard deadline on this, but we need to see this developing.
What we witnessed in Paris last Friday wasn't merely a political fumble. It was Starmer revealing his true character under pressure. The carefully orchestrated announcement in the French capital appeared on its surface to be a calculated move designed to showcase his diplomatic prowess. But beneath that veneer of competence lay 3 devastating flaws that have now erupted into a full-blown political crisis. First, Starmer's statement on Ukraine troop deployments contained a fatal ambiguity, promising MPs would receive a vote before any long-term deployment while deliberately avoiding any definition of what constitutes long-term. This vagueness wasn't accidental, it was a deliberate attempt to maintain political flexibility at the expense of parliamentary oversight. Second, his team failed to anticipate how this would play across the political spectrum, seemingly blind to how it would unite critics from both left and right. And third, perhaps most damaging, was the arrogance of making such an announcement on foreign soil, as if somehow the rules of domestic accountability didn't apply when standing at a foreign podium. The real damage, however, runs deeper than these tactical errors. Starmer's Friday disaster directly contradicts 5 separate pledges he's made to Labour supporters over the past year. He repeatedly promised transparency in all foreign policy decisions during party conferences. He assured worried backbenchers that military matters would always receive proper parliamentary scrutiny. He publicly committed to learning the lessons of Iraq regarding military deployments. He pledged a new era of democratic accountability in a major speech just 3 months ago. And most damning of all, he explicitly told voters during the election campaign that any potential military involvement would be subject to full parliamentary debate and approval. And these contradictions haven't gone unnoticed. The timing of this self-inflicted wound couldn't possibly be worse for Starmer. Economic indicators were finally showing potential improvement after months of stagnation, a narrative that could have given his government momentum. Instead, he's gifted his political opponents a perfect storm of criticism that transcends traditional ideological boundaries. I've spoken with 3 labor insiders who paint a picture of growing panic behind the scenes. This isn't just a communications error, one senior strategist admitted off the record. It's a fundamental misjudgment about how the public views military intervention post-Iraq and Afghanistan. Another source described emergency meetings throughout the weekend as the team struggled to contain the fallout. The problem, they explained, is that there's no easy way to clarify without admitting the original statement was deliberately crafted to be ambiguous. What makes this moment particularly significant is how it's created that rare phenomenon in British politics, a complete convergence of criticism across the political spectrum. The ambiguity around the long-term deployment definition has become a central point of contention, with voices from the traditional left, center, and right all questioning why Parliament isn't being consulted immediately as operational plans develop. This unity of opposition signals something more profound than typical political squabbling. It reflects a genuine concern about democratic processes being undermined. Political analysts are already placing this blunder alongside historical political self-destructions. Some compare it to John Major's Black Wednesday, a moment that irreparably damaged his government's credibility on economic matters. Others see parallels with Gordon Brown's bigoted woman hot mic disaster, revealing a character flaw that confirmed voters' worst suspicions. What both comparisons share is their status as defining moments that crystallized public perception in ways that proved impossible to reverse. But here's what should truly worry Starmer. The most damaging aspect isn't the statement itself, but what it reveals about his decision-making process. When facing complex foreign policy challenges, his instinct was to create deliberate ambiguity rather than embrace democratic accountability. This glimpse behind the curtain exposes a leadership approach fundamentally at odds with his carefully constructed public image of principled transparency. Opposition parties have recognized this vulnerability and are exploiting it mercilessly. The Conservatives, Reform UK, and even the Liberal Democrats, who had previously pressured Starmer to commit to parliamentary votes before military actions, have launched coordinated media campaigns highlighting this inconsistency. Rather than addressing substantive policy matters, Starmer now finds himself trapped in endless cycles of clarification and damage control. The repercussions extend far beyond temporary polling setbacks. This episode has fundamentally altered how voters perceive Starmer's core attributes of integrity and competence. For a politician who built his entire brand on being the adult in the room, the serious, trustworthy alternative to his predecessors, this revelation of political gamesmanship on matters of national security strikes at the very foundation of his political identity. The impact of Starmer's Friday disaster will echo far beyond this news cycle. What we're witnessing isn't merely a political misstep, but a revealing window into his character under pressure. When faced with difficult decisions, he appears willing to sacrifice long-held principles for short-term political gain. The consequences of this Ukraine policy blunder could become a defining moment in his leadership. As our research indicates, the success of his premiership now hinges on navigating this fallout while attempting to rebuild shattered trust. For someone who campaigned on competence and integrity, this self-inflicted wound cuts particularly deep. Some political wounds heal, others become permanent scars on public perception.